Returning now to the SICHAH, the Mishnah had given us three options through which land can be transferred, namely Kesef, Shtar, and Chazakah. The Gemara, and specifically Cheskia, proposed that the basis for the Kesef option was a pasuk from Yirmiyahu Perik 32, Sadot Ba'Kesef Yiknu. Tosfot's challenge to the Gemara lay in the fact that Cheskia should have used the pasuk in Bereshit 23, dealing with the purchase of the Ma'arat HaMachpelah as the source for Kesef, a source that, firstly, is recorded earlier in the Tanakh, and secondly, comes from the Chumash component, that generally carries more weight with respect to establishing halachic practice than the Nevi'im or the Ketuvim. The Rebbe in the SICHAH proposes that, according to Rashi's interpretation to the words Kesef Maleh, it becomes quite obvious on two counts as to why the Gemara resorted to a pasuk in Yirmiyahu rather than the pasuk in Bereshit. In the opening perek of Hilchot Mechira, the Rambam presents us with the laws dealing with the transfer of property from one person to another. In Halacha Gimel, he restates the position mentioned in the Gemara that ownership of karkaot, real estate, is accomplished through one of three means: Kesef, Shtar, and Chazakah. In Halacha Daled, he defines the Kesef options, taking note of the fact that in cities or countries that require the signing of documents in addition to the payment of money, the payment of Kesef in of itself does not transfer the ownership. At the conclusion of Halacha Daled, the Rambam makes a statement to the effect that Ve'ein karka niknit b'pachot mishav pruta, that if the transaction is to be completed through the Kesef option, the amount of Kesef cannot be less than the pruta, which was the lowest denomination of money throughout much of the Middle East. The ramification of such a halacha is that when using the Kesef option, one need not necessarily pay for the full value of the property, as long as it is greater than the pruta value and the owner is satisfied to transfer his rights to the property by the acceptance of that amount of money. Then that Kesef transaction validates the sale. In his commentary to the words B'Kesef Maleh, Rashi places into the mouth of Avraham a willingness to Ashalem Kol Shavia, to pay the full value of the property. This amount certainly would be far in excess of the minimum amount, namely the Shava Pruta, and it is for this reason, from the standpoint of Rashi, Avraham's purchase of the Ma'arat HaMachpelah from Ephron could not be used as a textual basis for the Kesef option when one transfers land to another, on account of the fact that if it was based on Bereshit 23, one would be required to pay the full value of the land to gain ownership. This, in actuality, is a position that is not supported by the halachic system. It is for this reason that the question raised by Tosafot is a non-issue from the standpoint of Rashi. In addition to the shortcomings of the text in Bereshit 23 regarding Kinyan Kesef, in that it would not accord with the halachic position that one is not required to pay the full amount of the Kesef in order to gain possession of the property, there is a second consideration reflected in the second half of Rashi in linking the Kesef Maleh of Avraham with the Kesef Maleh of David HaMelech. We noted earlier that legally neither David HaMelech nor Avraham were required to pay for the land in which they were interested. David HaMelech, in light of the fact that he had conquered the entire city of Yerushalayim, and therefore, by virtue of the fact that you had it, you owned it, you wanted it, you fought for it, and David HaMelech had fought for and conquered the land from the Yebusi, was under no obligation to pay for it. And Avraham, by virtue of the fact that Eretz Canaan had been promised to Avraham by God on 4 separate occasions, could also legally claim ownership to the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. The purpose in both instances for the purchase of the respective properties was therefore not to validate the transfer of ownership from one party to the other. Rather, it was to remove any link between the property and the original owner, which would otherwise provide the original owners with a continued connection to the property. In the case of David HaMelech, on account of the fact that it was taken by force. In the case of Avraham Avinu, the Bnei Chet, in their generosity, had given the property to Avraham. This, as we noted earlier, is the point that Rashi makes when he links the Kesef Maleh of Avraham with the Kesef Maleh of David HaMelech, that in both cases they did not need to pay for the land, they did so so that what they receive should be on a free and clear title. Consequence of this link, according to the Pshuta Shel Mikra, is that the payment that Avraham made to Ephron for the Marat HaMachpelah was not for the purpose of Kinyan, but rather to remove any connection between the Machpelah and Ephron. Rashi, therefore, could not use Bereshit 23 as a textual basis for Kinyan Kesef, in which the purpose of Kinyan Kesef is to validate a transfer of ownership. This, therefore, would explain why Cheskia, in presenting the textual source for Kinyan Kesef, does not use Bereshit 23 as Tosfot suggests, but instead traces the textual source to a pasuk in Yirmiyahu.